Jesse tree symbols, part three. And before we get into the Jesse tree symbols, one of the things that I did put, the reason I did, was everyone surprised to get my email yesterday?
Yes.
You're like, he's on top of it.
What days?
You know,
Yes.
you're like messing with your weekdays. But no, I was in Wolf Creek, sitting in their lodge all day while Silas was skiing with the
Oh.
ski team. So I had plenty of time to do uh, things, things that I normally put off to later in the week. Um, but one of the things that I do want to sort of highlight today before we get into the symbols, because the stories will kind of, and I have smaller clips of them as well. The O antiphons. Anyone ever heard of these? So O antiphons are actually a part of the liturgical hours and Catholic traditions in particular. And they call the O antiphons that take place, and what they are during Vespers or evening prayers, the refrains that are sung back, and they're the Magnificat antiphons is what they're called, are refrains that are sung before the Magnificat is read. Now, when I say Magnificat, does that ring a bell?
Hmm.
I'm talking about that's Mary's prayer.
Fun.
Sunday, yes, the prayer from Luke, and that's read. So that's read throughout the year. But the last 7 days leading up to Christmas sort of are the antiphon, or they're called the Great Advent antiphons, or the Great O's. And they take place from December 17th to December 23rd. And in my family, this our tradition is when we do our Advent devotions at night as a family, we sing as we kind of do in the service over the last few weeks, how we've in each week we've sung two more verses of O Come, Emmanuel. There are 7 verses in that, and each of them highlight a title of who Christ is. And so many years ago, because we did a lot of things with Shrinky Dinks, we actually developed a little an O antiphon thing. It says created by the Santos family. But I used this in a previous church where we printed these out. And it gives a little explanation of what the antiphons are, and then it breaks down the days. And so December 17th is actually that's this one has it reversed. Some of them do it, but O Sapientia, which is a wisdom, and then 18th is Adonai, which is and these are all actually represented in the same way. You have the Jesse tree things through these pages that look like this. And each one of them has, you might see that it's this all-seeing eye, but that is historic, although we kind of think that's creepy and has to deal with, like, some Mason stuff or something. I mean, no offense to Masons out there. Don't come get me in my sleep.
The North American Indians also
But
use that.
each of the antiphons represent, and people order them differently, but they're ordered generally used by the song. But the antiphon O Adonai is represented by a tent. The O Radix Jesse is this looks like a branch or a tree growing, and so the root of Jesse. Um, what do we got here? Key of David has a key in it, and Orion's is like the beginning, and so each of these verses from the song O Come Emmanuel are basically sung in every and in the Catholic tradition at Vespers before the Magnificat was read. They would increasingly sing one of these things, and then each day would build. And the idea is this is the last part of Advent, and it's leading up to this sort of time of celebration of Christmas. And again, the challenge for that many people listening to this or hearing these or sort of things are that we don't celebrate this culturally that way. Christmas goes from Thanksgiving all the way up to Christmas. Then we have a big gift giving celebration, a big feasting thing that may carry on at best maybe until New Year's Day, and then people are like, okay, we got to get on with life. But that's not the liturgical season. The liturgical season says there's a season of Advent that starts from the first Sunday before, counting backwards 4 Sundays before Christmas. And that season from that entire period are really meant to be a holy preparatory season where we're doing reflection about what it means to wait for Christ to return. Because in Easter, we're not waiting for Christ to return in the same way. We're contemplating Christ's death. But the advent of Christ in the world is meant to also replicate or shine ahead or foreshadow that arrival in the end times on that judgment day when Christ returns. So there's this sense of every every Advent season, we have an opportunity to consider Christ's return again in his incarnation into the world. And the Oantiphons take the names or the verses of the song, O Come, O Come, Emmanuel, and put them into a way to sort of celebrate the parts of who Jesus was. We have this dating back to the 6th century Italy, and it defined much of the practices of Western Europe in the centuries that followed. In the Middle Ages, they rung bells each night as they sung the O antiphons. So those in the community who might not, I mean, at that point, probably everyone was in church, but those who weren't would hear those bells and remind them as you're approaching this last I mean, it was a time of fasting, a time of restraint, not a time of partying. That came for the 12 days. Then you get to party for 12 days. Denny.
Was it more singing or was it more of a chanting?
It's sometimes it probably was sung, but it also is read. So like these individual ones, what they are in here is like for example, December 20th, this one is O Clavis David, or the Key of David. And the antiphon, which would be sung in Latin, and this is the English translation, or in English, depending on the tradition or where you're at. O Key of David and scepter of the house of Israel, who opens and no man shuts, who shuts and no man opens. Come and bring forth the captive from his prison, he who sits in darkness and in the shadow of death. And then that is reflected, the antiphon, basically the call back. It's sort of a sung refrain. The Key of David says, okay, so what's sung in the song, O come, Emmanuel, is, O come, thou Key of David, come, and open wide our heavenly home, make safe the way that leads on high, and close the path to misery. Now, obviously, you sing it, it sounds better than that. But I think the rhyming is horrible. I've thought that every time we always sing this. But what's interesting about that is not only do you have this going back really to the 6th century. They actually have a Roman philosopher by the name of Boethius, and he was one of the people who took classic Greek writings and turned them into Latin. He was sort of a precursor to the scholastic period, so an early thinker around Christianity. He is probably the first recorded place where this is referential to these antiphons, or these, that these come out of a history of the church and a tradition of the church. Now, what's interesting about this, and I didn't know this actually, although I had read it a while ago, I think I'd forgotten. If you take each of the letters of the antiphons, so Emmanuel, if you put Emmanuel up front, then Rex Gentum, then Orion, and then Clavis, and then Radix, and then Adonai, and then Sapientia, all these names of Jesus. The acronym that comes out of that is Eros Cras, ERO space CRAS, which is the Latin response, tomorrow I will be there. So it's built into this sort of framework of this. So because what we're saying is come, O come, O come, O key, O come thou Key of David, come. And you'll find that even in the sung verses, you have this order. Where it's, O come, thou Key of David, come. So it's a messianic title that is preceded by an O come, and then and followed by a come as well, and then an elaboration of that title, and then a verb, the verb to come, and then an elaboration of the request to come. So O Key of David, there's the messianic title, and then an elaboration, scepter of the house of Israel, who opens and no man shuts, and who shuts and no man opens. And then you have the second come, the verb, and then the elaboration of the request. And bring forth for the captives from his prison, who sits in the darkness and the shadow of death. So in every single one of these verses that we sing in O come, Emmanuel, there is this antiphon that is written or sung or read that reflects the sort of characteristic of the title itself. You might say, what's Orion's? Well, that's Dayspring. So, O come thou Dayspring from on high, and cheer us by thy drawing nigh, disperse the gloomy clouds of night, and death's dark shadow put to flight. Well, the antiphon that would precede the singing of that would be O Dayspring. Again, O, Dayspring being the title, an elaboration of the title, brightness of light and eternal sun of justice, the verb come, and then an elaboration of the request, enlighten those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death. So in every single one of these sung things, and we'll sing the whole, all 7 verses on Sunday, you get a portrait or a portrayal or a personification through biblical texts who Jesus was. He wasn't just the Messiah who came to save on the cross. He was all of these things. And this is all, this whole thing that I have printed out here that I'm sort of fumbling through is all online. I just put the file up. I didn't really format it for you because it's something I used in the past. But it also has all the passages. Then most of them are from a part of Isaiah. But every single one of those verses have some particular December. What's today? December 18th. O Adonai. Isaiah 11:4-5 and 33:20. O Adonai, the leader of Israel, you appeared to Moses in a burning bush, and you gave him the law on Sinai. O come and save us with your mighty power. So each of them have a scriptural reference of the names of who Christ was. Anyway, all that's to say, this stuff is up there. There's a little bit of reading up there. You can Google it if you want and get more information. But in the end, what I want to point out is that in many traditions right now, as of yesterday, we've entered into this O antiphon season, the final phase of the Advent season where we sort of gear up. And then on Christmas Eve, you don't have anything. Because Christmas Eve is considered on sort of that evening vespers is when Christ is born. So when we go outside and we light our candles, when we sing it, it's only at 6 o'clock or something, we light our candles and sing Silent Night. What we're doing is saying Christ is born. The light is in the world. The light has come into the world. Okay, any questions around that?
So we'd look that up under that.
If you type in O antiphons, and if you look in my email from yesterday, all this whole thing and some,
So I don't have to remember.
You don't have to remember it. It's on the website and in the email. Okay. What I will say is this, though, before we move on in all of this, is that I know I'm throwing new stuff at y'all, and it's different, and you probably never heard of it, but the thing that I love about it is this isn't a new fad. We live in a day and age where our attentions are always being drawn. We're always being captivated by the new. And youth ministry has always been like they're always trying to do something new and exciting to draw people in because the goal is to draw people in. And I think there's something significant about those things that have endured the test of time. And as I look back and I think in the 6th century, as Gregory the Great was reestablishing Western Christianity through Benedictine spirituality, you have an intentional practice that says during the season if you sort of spent the whole season in Advent season in preparation, by this time you've been 18 days into it, and you're sort of leading up to that final thing, and then this is when they would gather every night in the service and they would do these. So you don't have to use these. But however we approach this holy season, if we want to allow the holy liturgical season or the season of the church, and they may not feel like the church that we know now, but the church at large, 1,400 years of something is nothing to turn your nose up to. It's actually things that we should pay attention to. Why are they still around? Well, they're still around because they prepare people for the majesty of Christmas. And that's the beauty, and I'll say it's exhausting to do 12 days of Christmas, but it's also wonderful to do 12 days of Christmas because it's reserved, and then it ends in this celebration of Epiphany. But it's this, and the same thing happens at Easter. We spend 40 days in Lent, we spend a time of preparation, then we get to this Easter season, and then we have 8 days, it's called the Easter Octave. You have 8 days of celebration of Easter. And so it's meant to sort of every year put you through these rhythms. And I was recently talking about just the idea of I recently did a podcast. I was on a podcast for the gamification of theology and church and stuff. And we were talking about the idea that games you get to play again and again. So, you do bad, you learn a game, you play it, didn't go well. You're like, yeah, well, I'll get, next time we play, we sit down to a new game. Now I know a little bit more about it. Now I can do better at the game. Right?
Yeah, but I don't.
Yeah, you do. You're a great gamer. Yeah, that's because you hear that one game you played. You had a bad night. Tommy was here. He was like, you're like, he's judging my gaming. He still married you, so you're okay. But the point is every time you play a new game, I mean, every time you play a game that you've played, you get better at it. And you say, oh, well, that didn't work last time. And I think the liturgical season is that way. Every year until you're not able to be here, you get a new chance every December to start that liturgical year over and to try to do it better and to try to incorporate more meaning into it, to try to, and what it does is if you follow that sort of pattern, it walks you through the life of Christ. And like when we're called to be disciples, and if we're not following in patterns of learning and practice that continually sharpen and shape us, then what are we doing?
We
So
find as we get older, we not only learn, but we look at things differently too.
I would imagine so.
Yeah. Even like from your age to our
Oh, I'm
age.
sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. And you have more time to invest in more acts of discipleship. So I'm glad you're all here tonight. All right, let's jump into and this should go. Unlike last week where we kind of pulled them random from a couple of readings, I actually pulled these up here to make sure we have them. The first passage we want to jump back into Jesse Tree stuff. Where did we lean? We left off at First Samuel. Is that correct?
That was Ruth 3.
We did Ruth, we did Boaz and Ruth, but yeah, that's where we ended. We talked about Obed. So we're gonna First Samuel 17 is the next passage, and that's David and Goliath. And so what you have is a sling in there, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. You all know the story of David and Goliath, but I'll just read a section of it. Where's at the bottom? Saul clothed. This is Samuel. I'm not going to read the whole chapter, and I include the whole chapter because I think it's sometimes if you just get the snippet, it's kind of like, what's this about? And so sometimes the whole chapter gives you the context, but you all know the whole chapter, the whole story of the David and Goliath. But I'll read from verse 38 down to. Well, actually, I'll read from 41. The Philistine came and drew near to David with shield bare in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only youth and ruddy and handsome in appearance. The Philistine said, David, am I a dog that you come with to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, come, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the wild animals of the field. But David said to the Philistine, you come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. Emphasis mine. And I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine armies this very day to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the earth, so that all of the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give it you into our hands. Pretty powerful stuff. Also pretty violent stuff.
Yeah.
Never really considered chopping someone's head off.
Yeah. Old Testament, a lot of violence.
A lot of violence in the Old Testament. So what do y'all think about that? You like that story? The sling story? Yeah? How does it remind us of God's faithfulness, though?
Because David killed Goliath.
The underdog won. God was with him, not because of his own human strength, but because of the strength of the Lord. Any other thoughts? No? So this is the beginning. This is the turning point. Were you gonna say something, Denny?
No.
No? All right. This is the turning point. So now we go to, and so that's the sling. And I will say, before I even go any further than that, I was looking over the list from that I was looking at last week, and then as the farther I got into this one, it got really kind of weird in ways that I never. Like they had the bronze serpent as a one, and they had Jonah as a whale symbol of the whale. And so again, these come in all different shapes and sizes in terms of the stories that are David and Goliath, and then it goes to the scroll, for God's forgotten scroll is found, and there's a passage there. Prophecy, the shoot from the stump of Jesse, and then you have a stump. There's a prophecy of the new creation, a symbol of a lion and lamb together, a prophecy of the Prince of Peace, a dove and a crown. And so this passage, although some of them overlap, or this ordering, some of them overlap, there's no set, like this is not like you have to do these symbols or it doesn't work. My family used these symbols because it went along with the Geraldine McCullough book. And that's where we got, we made a list and we said, how do these all fit? And so we're going through the ones that, again, that I've gone through, but there are other ones. So if you see other ones out there, if you find another ornament, you find a book about it and it doesn't match, that's 100% okay. It really doesn't make a difference. The point is, we're intentionally going through the story of God's redemptive history.
Yeah, and I like the way the book, that's what.
Yeah, you got the book,
I
yeah.
read the book and I sent the book to my children and my grandchildren along with these and colored them all in, and we actually read the book
Yeah.
because I like the story.
Well, and it tells the story, and it's a great story.
Yeah.
I mean, again, if you haven't, I'm a huge fan of the Geraldine McCullough book, and it's a great Advent gift for folks too. I mean, we're kind of in the end of it, so
What is the name of the book? I got her name.
it's called the Jesse Tree.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a big red book.
yeah, I thought we were going to do, but I'm not going to do that.
These are the symbols from the book. We're not going to. I mean, if we could read through. I mean, that's for you to do on your own. I'm just
Yeah,
sort of
so-
giving you a framework around
Well,
some
I
of
do
the.
it when I read the book each day. I color these all in, and I actually have.
You and Pat did it every year. Yeah.
we made that a tradition,
Yeah.
and we actually set up a Christmas tree every year, or
A Jesse tree.
every year, and I'm doing it this year still.
Okay.
Good. Good on you, Denny. I think that's important. Pat's doing it with you.
Yeah.
So, what I want to read to you, though, for this passage of the crown, and that's just a simple crown, but really that's meant to point to the Davidic covenant. And again, I talk a lot about the covenants, the Adamic covenant, and then you have Noah, the Noahic covenant, and then you have the Abrahamic covenant, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then you have the Mosaic covenant. And each of them have a symbol. The garden for the first, or Sabbath, or the seventh, or the day of rest for the first. You have the rainbow for the second. You have the stars in the sky, or the the promise of the covenant of Israel with Abraham. And then in Moses you have the tablets, and that's a sign of the covenant. And in the Davidic kingdom you have the temple. So you have all these covenants assigned. So when we look at the Davidic covenant, you're looking at God's covenant with David, and what makes this is sort of the pivotal point in this storyline is that David was where God said, "I'm with you forever, and it's going to come through your line." And so, if you look at chapter 7, it says, "Where is it?" Where do I want to start for that? Not the House of Cedars. We'll start at 8. Now, therefore, you shall say to my servant David, thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, to be a prince over my people Israel, and I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all your enemies before you. And I will make you a great name, similar to Abraham, and he did, like the name of the great ones of the earth. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, so that they may live in their own place and be disturbed no more. And evildoers shall afflict them no more, as formerly, from the time that I appointed the judges over my people of Israel. And that's again the time they were still in Canaan, or the promised land after it was promised land after Canaan. And I will give rest from all of your enemies. Moreover, the Lord declares that the Lord will make you a house, and this is the promise of the temple. And when your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come forth from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He's talking about Solomon. And he shall build a house for my name, and I will establish his throne of his kingdom forever. So the Davidic line carries on through Solomon, and is established forever. I will be the father of him, and he shall be a son to me. And whenever he commits iniquity, I will punish him with the rod, such as mortals use, and with blows afflicted by human beings. But I will not take my steadfast love from him, as I took it from Saul, who I put away before you. Your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. In accordance with all these words and with the visions Nathan spoke to David. So you have the heart of this promise that God is making to the Davidic line. And in other places it's elaborated, but this is the line that leads to Jesus. So in this whole storyline, again, Boaz, Ruth and Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David, Solomon, and then it breaks up because, Jeroboam and Rehoboam, and then the kingdom splits, and there's a lot of problems, but the line still continues. There's still line through there. So you see God's faithfulness, and how can you not see it in that? That's like the most obvious. God saying, "I'm never going to take my love from you, never," and that's the fear of Israel. And remember, I've talked about the presence. God was being carted, or God's Spirit, the Holy Spirit was being carted around in the Ark of the Covenant, and having a place, a temple with the permanently established Holy of Holies means that God was going to dwell with them all the time. It wasn't like you got to chase God around, find the tent, find the tabernacle, find the Ark of the Covenant. You didn't have, like, that was all established. And so that's really the essence of the Davidic covenant. And it was the last one then before the new covenant. So any thoughts on that? All right, let's carry on. The next symbol is that of a temple. And it is 1 Kings 3. And where is it? You have the story in some readings. You have the story of the chop the baby in half story, and in the book you have to chop the baby in half. That's not. I really don't necessarily care for that as much. I prefer the first part of the request and Solomon's and Solomon and what am I saying, in 1 Kings 17, chapter 3. Verse 3, it says, Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, except that he sacrificed and offered incense at the high places. The king went into Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was where the principal high place. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night and said, Ask what I should give you. And Solomon said, You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant and my father David, and because he walked before you in faithfulness and righteousness and uprightness of heart towards you. You have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne today. And now, O Lord God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. Though I am only a child, I do not know how to go or how to come in, and your servant is in the midst of the people whom you have chosen, the great people, so numerous they cannot be numbered or counted. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil, for who can govern this great people of yours? It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, Because you have asked for this and not asked for yourself long life or riches for the life of your enemies, or for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, I now do in according to your word. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind like no one has ever seen before, no one like you shall rise after you. I will also give you what you have asked, both riches and honor, all the days of your life. No king shall compare to you. If you walk in my ways and keep my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your life. And Solomon awoke, and it had been a dream, and he came to Jerusalem, where he stood before the Ark of the Covenant, and he offered up burnt offerings and offerings of well-being, and provided a feast for all his servants. So you have this sort of promise, or this sort of this granting of Solomon, this wisdom, and yes, it makes him wise, and yes, God ended up making him rich, and God ended up giving all this sort of stuff. And sometimes this can be twisted and distorted. Like, if I do the right thing, maybe there will be a reward. That's a horrible, that's a horrible maxim to move forward on anything. But I think what this points to is that Solomon denied himself and the things that he might have wanted because of who he was, in favor of saying, let me lead, let me guide, let me be a servant of all. And so you both see God's faithfulness in the sense of God's providing for Israel through Solomon, but you also see the steadfast love of Solomon for God and the upright virtue of his character, in the sense that he said, I'll choose something that will benefit the others rather than benefit me. Now, obviously it benefits him as well, but all right, thoughts around that passage?
Well, one thing that I find conflicting, made Solomon so super rich, and yet talk about Solomon being so rich and what is the richest person in the world at the time, and yet God also talks about a rich man can't even get through an eye of a needle, or like the camel.
Yeah, yeah, no, you're
got,
right.
One minute he makes him rich, and now okay, how do you do that?
Well, I think I kind of look at all these passages as God acquiesces us. And I think that God established when the riches and the blessings are given by God and it's in a right appropriation, then it's the God helping the Israelites thrive. But it's contingent on the fact that they followed His commandments. And when their eyes shifted away from God, you start to see the demise because the Davidic kingdom, from the time after Solomon, went to pot.
And the I guess the rewards are all different. Like was it Jacob had children, so that was his reward.
Well, and I don't, and I think, as much as I won't say that I think there's evidence or it indicates there is some sort of reward system in the Old Testament.
Seems like it.
I don't think that it's meant to be. Well, and the challenge of that, again, like I've said about, it's like Job. If you're faithful, then God will restore on the other side. Well, what if God doesn't restore on the other side? Because then the Christian platitude is, well, God will restore it on the other side of life. So it's kind of like I pray for healing over my father. He's never healed, but his true healing comes when he dies because he's then truly healed from this fallen state. Well, that's in my mindset, that's just ways that we placate ourselves and placate ourselves to feel better about it. But it doesn't always end that way. There are lots of stories of martyrdom where faithful witnesses have got their heads chopped off, or since we're talking about that today. But in other words, I think that it's very easy to say that God will restore, God will give riches. I understand what you're saying in terms of the New Testament. Jesus says easier. Jesus doesn't say it's impossible. And what he's referring, but here's the thing: is you're just taking wealth and you're putting it on equal terms in terms of the parallel of it. You're saying they're parallel, but Jesus is not saying that wealth in and of itself is evil. He's saying the misappropriation of wealth or the evaluation of wealth is where the problem is. It's not impossible for someone with money to get into heaven. He's saying it's challenging, not because money is evil, but because what money does to us and the way money controls us and the way money controls the way we exist in the world, that's where it becomes problematic. And he recognizes that money has that power.
The value you put on money isn't.
But even in this, Solomon's like, I don't want money. Now you might say, well, he was, trust fund baby anyways. He had all sorts of money. Why would he? He's like, I don't know.
Richest man in the world. Yeah, I don't need anything.
Who said he was the richest man in the world?
He had Solomon's temples, all the jewel and gold.
Well, there were a lot of other civilizations that existed at that time, and there was wealth in those
richer at the
civilizations.
time?
I mean, how do you gauge someone's,
Just
against the
from
gold
what they
standard?
say, from what-
All right, moving on. First, anything that you all online want to add? This is why we normally have Denny online, so I can mute him.
And he does.
Oh, I can't hear you, Denny. You're not coming through.
I'm sitting there waving. It must be distorted.
All right, carrying on. The Raven. The Raven comes to the story where he's fed by a raven, and let me read that here.
And the raven's also part of Noah too, isn't he?
No, that was it could be a symbol for that.
Well, he sent the raven out first, and then the dove.
Yeah, I think I pulled up that. Where is it?
And the raven, by the way, a little bit of trivia, is a symbol of the Brannan family.
Oh, I'm in the wrong one. That's why.
Oh,
And the Celtic tradition.
Okay, I was looking in the wrong passage. No wonder I couldn't find it. So in the story of the Raven, you find really although the symbols of the raven in the story of the Jesse tree with the Macaulay, they have the story of the widow. And if you haven't heard it, it says in verse 8, it's called the widow of Zarephath. The word of the Lord came to him, saying, Now go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and live there, and I have commanded a widow there to feed you. So he set out and went to Zarephath. When he got to the gate of the town, the widow was there gathering sticks, and he called to her, "Bring me a little water in a vessel so that I may drink." And she was going to bring it, but he called her and said, "Bring me a morsel of bread in your hand." But she said, "As the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, and only a handful of meal in the jar and a little oil in a jug. And I am now gathering a couple of sticks so I may go home and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." A little melodramatic, but okay. Elijah said to her, "Do not be afraid to go and do as I've told you, but first make me a little cake of it and bring it to me, and afterwards make something for yourself and your son." Which, in my opinion, seems a little like, give me, give me, give me. But he was setting him up for a miracle. And thus says the Lord of the God of Israel, "The jar of meal will not be emptied, and the jug of oil will not fail until the day the Lord has sent rain on this earth." So she went and did as Elijah said, and that she so that she as well and he and her household ate for many days. The jar of meal was not emptied, neither did the jug of oil fail, according to the word of the Lord, as he spoke by Elijah. So in this story, and then another passage, not this one, the story is the raven is there and brings him food. But this is really just highlighting the role. And I don't know why Geraldine McCall chose Elijah. To be honest with you, I mean, he is considered sort of a bit one of the main prophets, and it's a great story of God's provision. It kind of foreshadows the feeding of the multitude. It foreshadows the sort of God's provision and offering of sustenance for his people. And so there are, and it points to just God's capacity to manipulate the material world and to have miracles. So it points to that, and you see God's faithfulness for his prophet. Now, the second one, the extension of that, is Elisha. I always remember Elisha comes after Elijah. And Elijah goes up, and Elisha says, "Give me a double portion of God's Spirit." And then one of kids, I think she includes the bear in there as a symbol because it points to one of the funniest stories, or one of the most entertaining stories, which is do you know what I'm talking about? The bear story. Does that ring a bell? No one? You all know about JL and the tent stake? Yeah, that one where she. Yeah, so this is one of those, falls into the same category. It is 2 Kings
He
2:19.
kills that guy with the what?
Was that? What did you say,
Jim
Jim?
is asking about the story. I know the story
Of what?
of the bear.
Of the bear. You good?
It ate the kids that were ridiculing Elisha, right?
Yeah. So Denny will appreciate this.
Yeah, go ahead and tell us again.
Now the people of the city said to Elisha, "The location of the city is good, as my Lord sees it, but the water is bad, and the land is unfruitful." He said, "Bring me a new bowl, and I shall put salt in it." So they brought it to him, and there he went to a spring of water, and threw salt into it, and said, "Thus says the Lord, I have made this water wholesome, and from now on neither death nor miscarriage shall come from it." And the water has been wholesome to this day, according to the word of the Lord that Elijah spoke. So this is like a miracle. It sort of echoes back to providing water in the desert that Moses gave the Israelites. And then it goes, and this is where it gets good. So he went up there to Bethel, and while he was going up on the way, some small boys came out of the city and jeered at him, saying, "Go away, bald head, go away, bald head."
I've heard that.
When he turned around and saw them, he cursed them in the name of the Lord, which I don't know what that looks like, but then here's the best part. Then two she bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. And from there he went on to Mount Carmel and returned to Samaria. So it's just like this little tidbit of this bear mauling of 42 children. And for whatever reason, and again, this is the part of me that says, I think they just stick it in there because it's funny. From after the fact, I'm sure in the moment it was sad, and parents lost their children, but here's the thing, and in my view there makes no sense to the story other than like this: don't mock prophets. I mean, I don't see God's. The reason I include the first part is because I see God's faithfulness, because the second part you don't really see God's faithfulness. What were you gonna say, Glenda?
No,
I was just laughing.
Oh,
no, but when I did this list with my kids years ago, I put Rahab in,
Yeah,
instead of,
me too, a red cord. But that would be much earlier.
yes, because I wanted to have some women in there, and because she was an outsider, that was pulled in
Yeah,
too.
and I think she is included in a lot of them. Again, it depends on the symbol, but that would have been back before the Promised Land. That would have been
Right.
back probably after the whip.
Yeah.
And some people you have the tablets in there. I mean, for that period. Again, you could make your own Jesse tree. You can pick the stories you want. The goal is though you're leading from creation to Christ. Like I would honestly, I don't know if I would pick Elijah. There's not, the story of. I think I might pick Ezra and Nehemiah. And like some of them do. They put a hammer for one of them, and sort of the rebuilding of the temple. And so I think for if I were to choose some of the stories myself, I would not necessarily choose these stories. But it's a symbol or it's a model. It's a framework. Okay, now we're getting into very short verses, which is good because we're winding it down to the last 10 or so. So this is December 17th, and it's Luke 1 through 16.
Is that a candelabra?
It's a candelabra, and and Zechariah is the figure that it points to, who was working in the temple or part of the temple, and it's the four. And sometimes people use symbols of the shell, like one of the other Jesse tree ones, because Zechariah was John the Baptist's father. So now we're getting into the sort of pre-Jesus times, and this is my biggest complaint: is it goes from King David to King Solomon to two prophets that are kind of just sort of loosely there, thrown in there in this formulation, and then it jumps all the way to Zechariah right before Christ's birth. And so you're talking about a 600-700 year gap between some of these stories. And I think there are some important stories in there as well. But Elisha, more importantly, would be a prophet that would have like the showing the power of God lighting the altar over against the story of the priest of Baal not being able to get anything lit. And so, but there again, they all sort of point to God's power, or God's provision, and the whole Old Testament is a story of God's faithfulness through this process of refining the people into the people of God.
So you should write a book, The Jesse Tree, the rest of the story.
The real story, according to Jason. The gospel according to Jason. No one's going to buy that. Jim would buy it. Probably. No, he wouldn't buy it. Jim would give me bad reviews. Okay, we're going to skip the first few verses because it will just jump to in the days of King, and this is in Luke 1:5. In the days of King Herod of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly order of Abijah. His wife was a descendant from the daughters of Aaron, again the Levite, so this is the Levite pathway, and her name was Elizabeth. Both of them were righteous before God, living blamelessly according to all commandments and the regulations of the Lord, but they had no children because Elizabeth was barren, and both were getting on in years. So again, this is stories connected. You kind of get the story of Sarah and not being able to have a child. So it's kind of like when God really wants a child, when God wants someone in the world, there's some miraculous things, stories about it. I mean, all of it. How many stories in the Bible from Samuel or from Moses or all the way up to John the Baptist and Jesus. Verse 8, when he was serving as a priest before God during his sections of the turn of a duty, hence the candelabra, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to enter the sanctuary of the Lord and offer incense. Now at the time of the incense offering, the whole assembly of the people were praying outside, and there appeared to him an angel of the Lord standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was terrified, and fear overwhelmed him. And the angel said, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard, and your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall name him John. And you will have a great joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, and he will be great in the sight of the Lord. But he must never eat drink, wine, or strong drink. Even before his birth, he will be filled with the Holy Spirit, and he will turn many people of Israel to the Lord their God." And keep in mind, the idea that he was filled with God's Spirit before he was even born should not be overlooked. because no one had the Spirit of the Lord automatically dwelling in them. So he might be one of these few individuals throughout the entire history of the Old Testament who was born in the Spirit, born with some sense of Spirit, of the Spirit of the Lord in them. Because, other times you see the disciples, the Spirit comes upon them, but not necessarily born and dwelling in. And so clearly he had a task, or hence the prophecy. Okay. Questions, thoughts? December 18th. Moving on.
Pardon me a second.
Nope, you're good.
Jason.
Luke 1:26, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. What, did someone say something?
Yeah, thank you. I've got to go cook dinner.
Okay, go for it, man.
Thank you.
You can catch the rest of it later. If not, you can
Yep.
just read verses on your own. Luke 18:26, in the 6th month, an angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town of Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man whose name was Joseph, in the house of David. So again, from the line of David. The virgin's name was Mary, and he came to her and said, "Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you." But she was much perplexed by his words and pondered what sort of greeting this might be. The angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God, and now you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will name him Jesus, and he will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his ancestor David." So there you have completion of the prophecy. Follows through. He will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and his kingdom and of his kingdom there will be no end. And Mary said to the angel, "How can this be, since I am a virgin?" And the angel said, "Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore the child will be born, and will be holy, and will be holy, set apart, and in that regard without sin, and he will be called the Son of God. And now your relative Elizabeth, in her old age, has also conceived a child, and this will be in the 6th month for her who is said to be barren. Nothing is impossible with God." And then Mary said, "Here am I, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word." And the angel departed from her. And then the next passage comes from that is Mary visiting Elizabeth, which is our lectionary text for this coming week. So you have the story of Mary, and what you have in that is you have the flower that's supposed to be, I believe, a lily, and lilies are meant to represent Mary. We're still doing good. Okay, December 19th. So now we're getting into tomorrow's, and I may just let me just sort of reference some of these, or just read a couple of the verses, 58 to 70. Or 57 to 80. Sorry, I don't know what I was reading there. The birth of John the Baptist. Now there came time for Elizabeth to give birth, and she bore him a son. Her neighbors and relatives heard the Lord had shown his great mercy to her, and they rejoiced with her. On the 8th day, they came to circumcise his child, and they were going to name him Zechariah after his father. His mother said, "No, he is to be called John." And they said to her, "None of your relatives has this name." And they began motioning to his father to find out what name he wanted to give him. He asked for a writing tablet, and he wrote, "His name is John." And all of them were amazed. And immediately his mouth was opened and his tongue was freed, and he began to speak, praising God. Fear came over all of the neighbors, and all of these things were talked about through the entire hill of the country of Judea. All who came heard them, pondered these things, and said, "What then will come of this? What will this child become? For indeed the hand of the Lord was with him." And so here you have the story of Zechariah, and with his doubt, he takes his tongue from him, and he knows his name is John, and so you have the naming of John. And honestly, this is why names are important, because you see the significance of names. Some names are given by God, and the names that people have are important. And when you're given a name, it's a part of but this is part of the faithfulness of the prophecy that someone would come before Jesus. And John fulfills that, and you see that in the tablet of writing down the name. His name is John. Now, in this story, they jump kind of ahead, and so even on December 20th, this is my one complaint about Geraldine's book, is that on the 20th you get Jesus, and I'm like, hey, we're 5 days early. So it is what it is, and I have the whole chapter of Matthew in there. And I won't read the whole thing because most of it's genealogy. But what I will point out, it's not really great reading, but it's good to read, and I think for a number of reasons. Because it names some folks. It names, as Glenda has pointed out, it names Tamar, and outside of Judah. Well, how do I read it?
to read through that whole chapter of all those names. It's an exercise in trying to pronounce things.
It is. Well, yeah, and I'm going to botch them up. But here it says, and the father of Boaz by Rahab. And so there you have the connection between Rahab and Boaz. Because it says, and Aram the father of Abinadab, and Abinadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. And then it goes on and through. But the important thing is, and keep in mind, this is in Matthew. And the reason, the genealogy, and this is reason that's very important. None of the other gospels have this genealogy. Who was Matthew written to? The Jews. Why is it important to have a list of Jesus' genealogy that includes outsider Gentiles in the notion of a book that's written for the Jews? Because the author of Matthew at that time wanted the Jews who were quibbling about whether Gentiles could be a part of this new expression of Judaism, wanted to point out, probably in some regard, hey, look at these people who were not Jewish by some lineage, by birth. And then it goes down, and I won't read it because I think it's worth reading at the time that it comes, but the birth of Jesus starting in verse 18, and they name him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. And I will just point to that idea of Christ being named Emmanuel, God is with us. And this is the whole notion of come, O come, Emmanuel, come, O day spring, come, O come. These are the O antiphons. Israel is saying, come, we want the Messiah to come. And then what is him? He should be named Emmanuel. God is with us. And this goes back to that whole story of the Israelites wanting God to be close, wanting the presence of God. God left. God was in the clouds. God was in the tabernacle. God was in the tent. Now God's in the Holy of Holies, in the temple in Jerusalem. And what happens in Jeremiah 31:31? God promises to dwell in us. So we become the temple. And this is that majesty of that transition of the Old Testament where God was sort of anthropomorphically existing in this world, and or having some physical presence in this world through the tabernacle and through the Ark of the Covenant and through the Holy of Holies. But again, now God lives in us. We are the temple. The body of the Christ is the temple, both in terms of the invisible church and in terms of us as individuals. All right, so that's the manger, and that's Matthew 1. And again, my complaint is that it jumps into this, but you got to tell the story, and they want to have all the symbols in it. The next one is the sheep, 15 through 21. And the angels left him and gone to heaven. The sheep said to one another, let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that had taken place, which the Lord has made known to us. So they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the child lying in a manger.
Haven't been able to keep the sheep home ever since.
I'll say that's a big manger. They got some commas. They need a few more commas in there. With haste and found Mary and Joseph and the child lying in a manger. That's a lot of people, man. They were all chilling in the manger.
They had Black and Angel said it had some going.
Maybe, and who knows? Honestly, as I read that, maybe it was one of those giant troughs, and that was the only thing they had for a bed. So maybe they were all in the manger. I don't know.
Actually, that's probably what a wooden trough.
We're going to do some art next week and reinterpret these. I'm kidding. When they saw this, they made known what had been told to them about this child. All who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds told them. And Mary treasured all these things and pondered them in her heart. And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had seen and heard, just as had been told to them. Now, the reason this is important is because the Christ child, God incarnate, had come into this world in a miraculous miracle birth on an unassuming night in the most unassuming place. And beyond the innkeeper and the creation of the animals that surrounded Mary and Joseph and newly born incarnated baby Jesus, who's the first to know? The shepherds, the most common folk. I mean, no dignitaries, no fanfare. The people who, in many ways, probably did most what Christ did. They served, they shepherded, they guided, they protected. They did all these things that personified who Christ was, and they were the first to celebrate. I mean, even before it says when the angels had left them and told them to go, you have the miraculous story of these angels coming and sending them. And I think it's echoing the constant refrain. God uses the little things. God uses the unassuming things. God uses those things that we think are, this is the upside down kingdom that we find. Carrying on in the story, as we finish out the visit of the Magi, and I will say this when it comes time when we do Epiphany Sunday, but one of the things I love Epiphany, and you won't see those wise men making our way into our nativity, our creche scene in the sanctuary until they make their way. Once Jesus was born, they'll make their way from the narthex through the windows, little by little. If you come, and in fact, I'll say this: over the 12 days of Christmas, if you came in every day, you would see them go from window well to window well because Silas and I moved them, and they're making their journey to visit. Why? Because by the time they made it there, baby Jesus probably was cruising. He was probably crawling. He was wearing whatever version of diapers they had. The swaddling cloth now became his
Yeah, it was quite a
little.
bit later, huh?
It would have to have been because they came from the east and they came by camel and by foot, and it would have taken a long time for them to get there.
I read someplace that they had known about this a long time
Yeah.
before it even happened.
Yeah. Well, this is where you get to predictions and prophecies.
Yeah, the predictions of
And this is why in Matthew as well, the only one who mentions the Magi. And the Magi are thought to, and this is why we celebrate Epiphanies, because they were thought to become from an Indian origin, from a Persian origin, from an Asian origin.
Yeah.
And so they came from three different Eastern regions, not the Western mindset, not the Middle Eastern mindset, but these Eastern regions. And they came even though they had different worldviews. Zoroastrian would have been the expression of the Persian culture. Some folk version of Hinduism would have been what the Indian would have come, and some version of Buddhism is what would have come from the East. And so non-Western religions come to acknowledge the Christ child, and they come from afar and they come from a distance. So it takes time. And so in the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in the Bethlehem of Judea, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born, the King of the Jews? For we observed his star in the east and have come to pay him homage." And I'll add, I have never read the book, so I really can't vouch for it, but there's a book that it's called something about the star. And basically the theory is that the star that was there was the alignment of multiple stars. You get things you
I
get
read
this
that not too
super,
long ago.
yeah.
And it's took them-
multiple stars or planets.
Planets probably, or
Planets,
planets,
probably.
but it was the alignment and the timing of it to
And the
get there.
alignment and the timing, they've gone back to it decided that this happened. No, probably about between 6 months and a year before Christ was born.
After Christ was born.
It's gonna
No.
happen.
Oh, before you mean the
Before-
alignment?
before
Yeah,
the
yeah.
alignment had.
Yeah.
So that's when everything started moving
Yeah.
that way.
And yet it's going to happen January 8th of 2025. The planets are all going to align.
20.
But they aligned. They didn't just align. They actually.
So that's
they actually
that's when we
crossed.
start back.
At January 8th, all the planets are going to be in line again.
So that means when we come back
Yeah.
for our Bible
That would
study
be
on the
cool.
8th,
Oh, let's
we'll
do
go
it.
outside
Yeah, let's
and
do
we'll
that.
check out the alignment.
That would be so cool.
Because I'll probably talk, well, actually, we'll come back. We won't come back to Romans. Let's come back with Epiphany. We'll dig into a little Epiphany,
Yep.
the first one
And we
back.
should be able to see it if it's a clear night.
Because if that's what's up there, we can say, hey, and maybe that's the, similar. So I can't vouch for that. I've never done much research into
It's
how
a good night. I have a big telescope.
So now here's what I would say. One is then in the order of the universe and the way the stars line up, it means that God timed Christ's birth in accordance with the alignment of these stars.
Now, is there any
Or did God supernaturally place a star in the sky? I can't speak to either of those. I just espouse
would
there's
there
a
be
star.
any significance to this coming up with anything of it?
Well, you know what? From in the next 2 weeks, I'll read around and see what I can find, and
Yeah.
I'll read up on the whole star theory, and we'll talk
Okay.
about that on the 8th, and then we'll start the week after that with
Jason,
yeah.
in the planetarium here in Chicago, I think they still do it. I've seen it a few times. They do a show every Christmas season, Advent season, about this, about
About
the
that.
stars. And, yeah, and you can sit and they'll show you on this. You sit, look, leaning back in the chair, and they'll show you this whole star arrangement that they think,
How would it come together?
right?
Yeah.
How that I think they call it the Star of the East or something like that. Every year they do that show.
Yeah, and I've heard about
So,
it too. Again, I haven't studied much around the star holes theory. I probably should at some point have looked at it, but it's always been something I've thought about, but never did. But anyway, all that's to say is the symbols of the Magi bringing in gold for the king, myrrh for death, and frankincense is what they lit for the deities to kind of honor the deities. And so there's a sense of God's incarnation, there's a sense of God's death, and there's a sense of God's kingship in Christ Jesus. Um, and that's Matthew 1 through 22, 1 through 15. And then you have the angel on December 23rd. And this is a little, and again, I would also say if I were to write this myself, I would probably put these in different orders because I think this is a little bit out of order. But in the same region where the shepherds were living in the fields, keeping watch over the flocks by night, the angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said, "Do not be afraid, for I am bringing good news of great joy for all people. Unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign for you. You will find the child wrapped in bands of cloth and lying in a manger." Suddenly there was an angel with a multitude of heavenly hosts praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace to all those whom he favors." Um, as I read that, my mind my mind thinks, why is that a sign? And again, now I have this image of this big long trough and them all lying in a manger, but maybe they isolate it because of this. You'll find the child wrapped in bands of cloth lying in a manger. And I guess that would have been odd, though. I guess maybe that's the sign. Because who in their right mind, if they owned a house, would put their child in a manger? So they're looking for a very specific sign. But that's the angel's proclamation. If I were to reorder these, I would probably put that before the shepherds, because then the shepherds go and find. I didn't write this. These symbols were based for us on the story that Geraldine McCauley used. The final one, which is read on Christmas Eve, and there isn't one for Christmas Day, although I wish there was. And this is just, and you're I'm sure all familiar with it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In the beginning he was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being with him was life. And the life was the light of all people, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness shall not overcome it. And then he goes into the phrase about John the Baptist, or the part about John the Baptist. But I think that this is probably, for me, this is the heart of John 1, chapter 1 is the heart of Christmas. And I think we so sometimes dress Christmas up in the cuteness of the holidays. And so the idea that Christ was the light that came into the world is just, for me, is God, the true. There's a philosopher by the name of Martin Buber who talks about we live in relationships where we see other people as it's. It's at the I, meaning the self-reflection of who we are, and the other becomes it. You're an object. I think we have that see all over the place. You go into the grocery store, you're treating the checkout, person as you don't really encounter them as a person. They don't encounter you as a person. You're just there to make some sort of, sort of personless transaction. Now, you may dress that up with some pleasantries, but in the end, you're not looking to have a conversation with them. You're not looking to be best friends with them. They're there to function with the purpose, and you're there to get out of there as soon as possible. And they're whipping those things down as fast as you can and not giving you time to pack the bags. What God became in the incarnation was switching that whole narrative of an I-it relationship where you objectify the other person to an I-thou relationship. Thou, as in, I encounter you as a thou, as a person, as a subject. And I think that what is quintessentially in the story of the Word becoming flesh was God entering into an I-thou relationship with humanity, a genuine, reciprocal give and take relationship that had not been there prior to this advent of Christ coming into the world. And it foreshadows the event of the Spirit living and dwelling with us so that we can then interact, and we have this symbiotic relationship with the Holy Spirit that connects all of us, connects us to God, connects us to one another. And then that's the story of, and there you have it. I mean, obviously what happens over the next 33 years is different, but that's what you do in Lent. Where does Lent pick up the story? If you look at the stories right before Lent, it often sort of points to the fact that this is beginning and jumping into the idea of what was what were those. We really don't have a lot in the first 30 years of Jesus' life, but we have a lot in the last 3. And so what we do in this liturgical year is we start with creation, with the story of the Jesse tree. We go all the way up to Christ's birth. Then you got some stuff in between. You have in January after Epiphany, you have Christ's presentation. You have a couple other Sundays, and then a few other days later, it's Lent. And then you enter into Christ's journey through his life, up to his death and resurrection, and then later come Pentecost. So every year we get the opportunity to go from the very creation of the universe up to the arrival of the Pentecost, of the arrival of the Spirit. And then we're sent into this ordinary time, this green time, where we're meant to live into that. And every year we're reminded of it. This is one of the things I love about Taizé, is every week in Taizé they walk you through. So every Friday in Taizé is Good Friday, and every Saturday is Easter, or the beginning of the vigils. The night is the beginning of Easter, and then Sunday is looked at as sort of the Sabbath, the Easter day. This is what we're called to do. We're called to go through these practices every year so that we're reformed, we're formed into that idea of who we are and a reminder of who we are through the narratives. So, all right, that's the Jesse tree.
And you would enjoy the book. The book is only 70 some pages, but it's about a little boy who goes into a church and meets a carpenter, an older gentleman who's kind of rough, and he questions what the gentleman's doing. And basically the gentleman is carving the Jesse tree. And each day they go through a different thing, and it's a lot of fun. It's the way the boy keeps asking questions, and the man. And
That's what it looks like.
yeah, it's not very big, and I forget how much it was. Yeah,
It's well worth it.
Yeah, I bought it for.
And if
all
you
my
have any kids or grandkids you want to get a really good gift for,
that's what I got. My
that would.
kids.
And the other one that I would say on the other side of that is there's a book called The Tale of Three Trees,
Yeah.
which is the story of 3 pieces of wood. The wood that became the manger, the wood that became the cross. No, the wood that became the boat that carried Jesus in the water, and the wood that became the cross. And it's a great connective story. So,
Okay.
all right. Well, folks, it'll be 2 weeks till we gather again. We'll do a look at Epiphany, in particular since the stars. I'll do a little teaching around the stars, and then we'll begin with Romans after that. So,
Okay, sounds
all right.
good. Sounds good.
Goodbye, walkers. Hope you have a good evening.
Yes.
If we don't
Thank you. Thank you.
You all.
Have a blessed time.
Be up.
What I like to say is, and this is, people, there's 2 schools of thought. If you say happy holidays, some people are like, oh, you're shipping Jesus. Well, one, I would say if you're in a secular environment, saying happy holidays acknowledges that not everyone is a Christian. And remember that the holidays is another way of saying holy days. And holy days as being days that are set apart. So even if you're Jewish, if you're Islam, if you're Muslim, or if it's Kwanzaa, whatever it might be, these are holy days or days that are set apart. So there's nothing wrong with saying happy holidays. What I tend to say is, may your holy days be blessed.
Don't say that too loud, no, because.
Don't say that to who?
Well, I'll tell you why.
To who?
We used to do.
No, don't say that to who?
I'm
I'm going to stop this.
We used